Dear friends, today we have with us Professor Subhash Kak, who is a globally renowned computer scientist, and he's also among the most well known Hindu scholars of our time. And today he's joining us to speak about his latest book, The Age of Artificial Intelligence. Professor Kak, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Pallavi. Glad to be on your show.
Yeah. So let's begin with your book, Professor Kak, because artificial intelligence is such a hot topic now. I mean, the fact is that AI has been a part of our lives for many decades now, like, say for instance, the autopilots in the aircrafts and things like that. But over the past decade or so, it's really become a very talked about topic in the sense that what's going to happen in the future, is AI going to take over the world, and so on and so forth. So let's first begin with your book and what do we have with that book?
Yes, there are two major things. Of course, computers and AI to a certain extent have been a part of certain technology area sectors, but now they become ubiquitous. They have entered everybody's life. You know, you have social media, which is run by AI. Then you have robots of different kind who run factories, and you also have the possibility of self-driven cars. And there are autopilot modes for many cars, but now, you know, if it becomes even more widely adopted, that's going to have a great deal of influence on society. So the two big issues are, what will it do to jobs? And the universal agreement is that most jobs will disappear. So this is one big thing, and that will have implications for society. And the second thing, which is partly an implication of or a result of consequence of AI, is that population collapse that people are talking about. That populations are going to fall very rapidly all across the world, and they've already begun to fall in Asia and Europe and the Americas, and even the northern Africa region, because you need a fertility rate of 2.1 for population to remain constant. And it's fallen to as low as 1.3 or 1.2 in most of Europe. In China, it's about 1.3. In Korea, it's 0.68. And in India also, it's dropped below 2. So in China, for example, by the end of this century, the population is expected to be one fourth of what it is now. So clearly, it's going to have geopolitical implications, right? And then as population falls unevenly across regions, there will be pressures on society. There could be wars. So all kinds of implications. Now, there is one prediction by an institute in Vienna, according to which by 2300 the world population will be 1/80th of what it is now. Right now it's 8 billion. So the claim is that by 2300 it will be as low as 100 million. So clearly, you know, you can imagine if it falls as greatly as that, the big cities will disappear, or populations will shrink, or, you know, nations which have attempted very hard to grow their population, like Australia, which is 40 million or so. Australia is 40 million, but if the whole world were to be only 100 million, just imagine what will happen. So all kinds of issues that come up. So I've looked at them in this book, The Age of AI, based on the latest scholarship. I looked at both the technical AI angle, because AI already can translate instantaneously from one language to another. It can create art. It can generative AI. We have LLMs, you know, large language models used by Gen by platforms such as ChatGPT or Grok or Claude or Gemini or Google and so on. So you can ask questions, have conversation, and and that also raises questions. Will such generative AI become conscious? Because if it were to become conscious, then that will have the biggest implications for humanity. But fortunately, 2 years ago, I proved the theorem saying that computers will never be conscious. So that's a big relief. But still, in spite of that, computers will dominate life in ways that we can't even imagine.
Yeah. Just, Australia's population is closer to 30 million, actually, not even 40
Okay.
million. Uh,
All right.
yeah, yeah, but just on the population issue, because this is a very interesting facet. How is AI? How will AI actually result in lower populations? Because this is an interesting thread. And the second thing is that over history, human population has actually been around 1 to 2 billion, if I'm not mistaken. So why is that fear? Like, even say if it drops down to say 2 or 3 billion, that's probably all right. But why is that fear that it might go down to 100 million? I mean, what is the relation between AI and the population dropping that much?
The average of 1.3 that I'm talking about, which is already all over Europe, is, one just more than one child. Now, just look at this mathematics. If every couple, and supposing if it to fall below 1.3 to 1, and it has already fallen below that in many parts of China and Korea, as I said, it's 0.68. So if every couple gets one, then the number of children, a number of people gets halved in one generation, which is 30 years. In another 30 years, becomes one fourth. In another 30 years, it becomes one eighth. Another 30 years becomes 1/16. So in 7 generations, it becomes 100th. That's where the prediction from this demographic institute in Vienna comes from. That a lot of people are also not having children. They say, well, there are not going to be jobs for children. One reason, it's a kind of a balancing act. Society produces more children when more children are needed, as in the villages in pre-industrial Europe or pre-industrial world, everywhere, Asia. The farmers needed more and more hands, so they had more and more children, right? Now you have machines doing all the farming. Or then people shifted to the cities, and there were big factories where more and more people were needed to assemble cars or other tools. But now machines do that. You don't need cars. In fact, you need cars. You don't need you don't need humans to assemble them. Robots are doing that. In fact, since the Chinese planners are aware of the quick decrease in their population. Now, we don't really know. We are saying 1/80th, but that is a prediction, and maybe things will change. Maybe it will stabilize at 2 billion or
Yeah.
1 billion. Nobody really knows. But the possibility that it could fall even further exists. Uh, and it's also true that before uh, until about 2000 years ago, the world population was about 100 million. Then it slowly climbed up to a billion, I think, 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And in the last 200 years, it's exploded, exponentially to 8 billion, and it's expected to go a bit further before it starts falling.
Yeah.
China, we have already mentioned, will fall quickly the rest of this century. India is expected to keep on climbing for another generation before it also starts to fall quickly. So these are the drivers.
Yeah. So the connection between AI and population being that because people will require fewer children as in a pre-industrial world, and as life becomes more mechanized and more technological, the incentive to have children will fall even further. And
Right.
that is the, because I was just trying to correlate how AI will impact that,
Right.
generally speaking. But yeah, but although of course that is a simplified argument, we don't know what may actually happen,
Right.
but but it's just one of those things that is a possibility. So interesting argument there. But coming back to the other aspect that you mentioned about jobs, like there's a lot of fear that a lot of jobs that we do today might not be available in the future. But I was reading somewhere that the same kind of apprehensions came when the industrial revolution came. Like a lot of jobs that people would do manually were taken over by machines. But those fears did not really pan out in the way that people expected, because then people developed new skills and society adapted to those inventions. How do you feel about that? That how is AI likely to impact this aspect?
Absolutely. You're right. When the Industrial Revolution began in the 1820s, there was fear that now what will humans do? You didn't need that many people on the farms. People started migrating to the towns, but then new kind of jobs arose. And these were office jobs because ledgers had to be kept, information had to be recorded, decisions had to be taken. So one kind of jobs were replaced by another kind of jobs. And then when the computer revolution began 40, 50 years ago, you needed a lot of programmers who were, sitting in front of their computers and shifting data from one file to another and so on. Well, the AI revolution is different, for not only does it replace brawn or muscles using robots, right? It also replaces the brain. And therefore, um, literally everything that was done by people sitting in offices can be farmed out to AI machines. In fact, this is already happening in the AI sector itself, in the tech sector itself in the US, that um, this past year, because of LLM, large language models like ChatGPT and Grok and so on, which can also do programming. So um, tech companies which were, say, hiring um, 10 programmers in a certain department are hiring only two, because what eight of those 10 did is going to be farmed out to the machine. They can even do code, and then you still need two human beings to make sure that everything is okay, because sometimes machines can make mistakes.
Yeah.
So this is where there is a fundamental shift, and this is something totally unexpected. People didn't expect AI, the large language models. 3 or 4 years ago, nobody saw it coming, that it would stir up the whole the job landscape in such a fundamental manner in such a short time.
Yeah, and another thing that one notices, I mean, this is the technical part of it, but even with, say, these softwares that basically they tell you what the input is. So if you ask a question on these machines, they will, like the information that they're providing is based on the input in the software. So I mean, from a very layman's perspective, I feel that the machine is still not doing the thinking. That it's basically doing the maybe the analytical part of it. Maybe sourcing stuff and giving a logical, presenting it in a logical format, no doubt. But it's not coming up with something new. Now, do you reckon that that could also change in the future? Because that, if it comes to a stage where the machines could actually start thinking and coming up with their own stuff, now that would be the threshold where we see whether it's conscious or not conscious.
No, well, I said it's not conscious, because what is consciousness? That's a deep philosophical question. Consciousness is awareness of what you're doing. But what we do, what you and I and what everybody else does, is recognize patterns or respond to data based on stuff that it's already stored, and
Yeah.
do procedural tasks. See, what we do in
Yeah.
offices are procedural tasks. And until now, these tasks were so complicated that we thought that we could only trust human beings from doing that. But now, machines can do procedural tasks. There's no consciousness involved there. When people
Yeah.
were sitting in bureaus and offices, they're not doing critical thinking. They're only following procedures.
Yeah.
Bureaucrats in Brussels or in Canberra or wherever else or in Delhi. So all those jobs, literally all those jobs, will be at risk. You will still need some people to make sure that the AI machine has not made a mistake, because it can make mistakes. And you were
Sure.
absolutely right. The database that it depends on could be in error or could be biased. And in fact, that's already happening during the
Yeah.
COVID pandemic. The decision making was done by bureaucrats, but it was based on information that was supplied by machines. Certain physicians said, or the pharma industry, or the medical community said, these are the reasons, or this is what you have to do. And then
Yeah.
the enforcers were the police force or other bureaucrats who are not actually thinking, or nobody thinks. We normally just respond in a
Yeah.
procedural way. um, let
Yeah.
me illustrate that by another example. How do we learn to speak a language? Well, we need to know grammar, to write in a certain way, which is judged correct by people who know the language very well. But look at people who grow in a language, children. They also speak very well. Now, maybe they might make errors from time to time, but they've internalized the rules of grammar automatically. This is precisely how an AI machine, internalizes the rules of grammar. And a lot of our conversation is based on stored information. And this is how LLMs are operating. So
Yeah.
what they do is they gather bits and pieces of information where they are actually doing this work, because sometimes, or maybe 80 or 90% of all the queries are already being asked. So they already have stored, canned responses. And so it comes out right off, right? But if they have to generate it for the first time, so they can put it all together just as a child puts it together, and it sounds perfectly fine. And sometimes, of course, the child may not know what he or she actually meant by what they said. And
Yeah.
that can also be true of a AI machine.
Yeah, because I find it very fascinating, because there are times when you ask a question and they will give you a response which is the predominant narrative around that subject, whether it's true or not is irrelevant. And then if you put in some more information, it will say, yeah, sorry, I missed this, or things like that. So then coming to my next question, that do you foresee a possibility where these machines could actually become self-aware? Like, so far, as I mentioned, that they are only giving out data that is fed in. And it's quite incredible that softwares have been able developers have been able to create a software where they are logically able to connect that data, in a way that humans can. But nevertheless, it's still not come to a stage where they are creating their own data, so to speak. So do you think that, because there are some people, like I think Elon Musk being among them, who feel that that AI could actually become conscious and take over the world? Do you reckon that is likely to happen ever?
A lot of captains of industry, people like Elon Musk and others, are afraid that computers will become, or AI machines will become conscious. In fact, one of the pioneers of AI is a fellow named Geoffrey Hinton, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics, but it was actually for AI last year. And he has
Mhm.
said that there is a 10 to 20% chance that because of AI,
Mhm.
humanity will become extinct in the next
Mhm.
100 years. Now, I don't subscribe to any of that. I think they are wrong. And they are wrong for the reason which I mentioned earlier on, that I have, in fact, proved a theorem which says that computers will not become conscious. So we don't have to be afraid of that. Computers will never become self aware. But that doesn't really matter as far as uh, the influence of AI machines on society is concerned. Because how does it influence society? We cede decision making to AI machines, right? They could be either in the office. It decides, well, who should get the visa or who should not get the visa, if it's that kind of information, or AI machines which decide, well, are they the data which has been put in by people about their salary, etc., is correct, or is the assessment of tax correct? Or so, this is what society does, right? Or
Yeah.
how do we look at various data to decide whether a country should fight a war with another country who is threatening the other, right? So these are based on processing of data, on pattern recognition, where computers certainly are in a position now to deal with more data than any human being can. That has already occurred. And so, from that perspective, if Elon Musk is scared that humanity could be in danger, maybe to the extent that we would be so overawed by the computing power of machines that we would cede decision making, CEDE, you know, give the decision making to the computers and be afraid to step up and say, well, but this doesn't make sense, right? You know, it's like what happened in the COVID times. Even people who were walking alone on the beach were sometimes fined by the police, even though they were not, you know, near any other human being, because the police was acting in a robot-like manner. You know, this
Yeah.
is what humans do. We
Yeah.
easily let somebody else, some other higher authority, it could be a book which says things that you should do certain such things or even kill others. We humans do this. And
Yeah.
so disinformation is one danger, as you very correctly pointed out. The data on which the computer might be making the decisions may be totally biased, because the way it has been arranged and given to it may be driven by some ideological considerations, right? So that is a huge danger. Disinformation is a danger, and humans ultimately are very gullible. Humans want to believe in some in a certain well, view of the world into which they are raised. I often give the example of pets. The same pet who's being sold in a store could be adopted by four different kinds of families with different views of, of how they should be raised, and each one of them would be quite happy to
Yeah.
go to whichever milieu it went into. Likewise, human beings, if we
Yeah.
are um, acculturated, I'm not going to use the word brainwashed, but raised in a certain system of belief, we are quite happy to then live according to that. And so AI would uh, increase that danger. Now, the other thing that will happen is the human brain is plastic. Based on what we do, the very wiring of the human brain changes. Now, if children and adults spend most of their day looking at a two-dimensional screen, it's
Yeah.
going to impact the very way our mind works. And we don't even know what kind of an influence that will have on society.
Yeah. So you make two very interesting points that irrespective of whether AI becomes conscious or not, there's going to be a huge impact on society, which could be both positive and negative, depending on how we proceed with this. And that's why certain measures probably should be undertaken to try and negate those negative impacts that AI can have. And as you mentioned, the elasticity of the brain, how people are influenced by their surroundings and disinformation, and so that's a very fascinating thing. Just if you could briefly tell us now, I know that the theorem that you would have proved, it's probably a very long, there's a lot of probably mathematics as well as a lot of other things, but very briefly, if you could tell us, that how did you come to this conclusion that very unlikely or impossible for AI to become conscious?
Yeah, Pallavi, your question is what is the intuition behind the theorem? Because ultimately, behind all scientific ideas is a simple intuition. So the intuition
Yeah.
is this: consciousness is a unity. You are conscious or you're not conscious. I, you, or anybody else, we know when we are
Yeah.
conscious, right? Now, if the idea to which many scientists subscribe, namely that computers will become conscious when they become sufficiently complex, right? When there are so many modules, so many circuits, as many as inside the brain, then suddenly one day the computer will become conscious, right? So this is the standard argument that you read in psychology journals or in certain AI journals. So the paper that I published in the leading journal called the Journal of AI and Consciousness, it's focused exactly on this problem, was this intuition. If
Mhm.
a machine becomes conscious because the complexity of its components, then you can imagine another machine which has this conscious machine as a part, right? So it is so complex that parts of it have complexity which exceeds what is required for consciousness, right? And then, therefore, you would have the implausible situation that this super machine is conscious and its subparts are also conscious, which is an impossibility because consciousness cannot have subparts which are conscious. In fact, this is the proof of the theorem. Of course,
Mhm.
it's all dressed up in the appropriate mathematics, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but as you said, uh, uh, that ultimately does not matter.
Yeah.
And whether computers are conscious, machines are conscious or not, they will be doing all this stuff that is required in our life. What do we do? We get entertained. Our mind goes from one storyline to another storyline when we are watching AI, or when we are in front of our computers, we are going from one Instagram page to another. We're looking at one face and another face, and people can spend their entire day doing this. This is what the mind does, right? So the mind, so there's nothing. It's like a machine. Most of the time, we are like AI. In fact, this is the other important takeaway from it, that what human beings or other conscious beings are really not different from what AI does, right? And it's only when we are creative that our mind, in a mysterious way, does things which it's not supposed to do. Because then you seem to get inspiration from outside of your mind. Now, you might say, well, what does that really mean? And you really cannot put it in a logical form. All you can say is that creativity is sort of out of the box, or it cannot be explained rationally. Or when you talk to creative people like scientists or artists, they would say, well, they were dreaming. They saw this in a dream. And so what that points to is that consciousness itself is, if it's not a product of the body, as I've argued in my theorem, then maybe
Yeah.
it is another dimension to reality,
Yeah.
right? And just as AI machines have all these negative possibilities for society, including collapse of population, but they also have, or this whole argument or conversation has the potential to take human beings to a place which can bring them happiness, that indeed they can look into the possibility of knowing what this consciousness is. And this is where
Yeah.
Indian tradition comes in from, because this is
Yeah.
precisely what the Indian tradition has spoken about all the previous centuries or millennia. And so this is the positive side to it.
Yeah. No, in fact, that was my last question. Here, this is where the really interesting part comes in, because in the Hindu in Hindu philosophy, consciousness is not a product of matter or the brain. Rather, matter is a manifestation of that universal consciousness. While in the modern Western thought, it's slightly different. Where although there's now a lot of discussion on it, but traditionally speaking, they believe that mind or consciousness is a product of the brain. So it will be very interesting to see which way AI actually goes. And just your final thoughts, because you mentioned the positive aspect. So I want to end on that. That while there are some dangers, but surely there could be positive impacts as well, in the sense that a lot of work that today humans have to do, like maybe robots can come in and do a bulk of that work, and then humans can be have that space and freedom to actually look into the nature of reality and explore things that they probably wouldn't have had the chance to do otherwise.
Absolutely. I think what will happen is if the drudgery of life, you are doing on the assembly line, or you're in the office staring from morning to night, if you're in the finance sector, for example, that is all drudgery. And once machines do it, then humans don't want to do it, right? So if that can be taken away, which it will be taken away by AI machines, then possibly human beings can look forward to more creative engagement with nature and with themselves and with each other. So, art, music, or ways of self discovery. And this could be universal if there are no pressures on Earth, on planet Earth, as far as stuff which is causing pollution or causing temperatures to rise, and global warming, whatever. If the population shrinks, and people are doing more creative work, maybe there'll be less crime, or there'll be no crime. Maybe, could be that humanity will enter a new golden age.
Yeah. Yeah, surely. I mean, I am sure people would love to have robots who do the cleaning at home, for instance, but thank you so much, Professor Kak. Always a pleasure to speak to you. And we are definitely going to have many more interviews in the future. Thank you so much for joining us today.